Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. Our dedication to living life joyfully allows us to confront the reality of unmitigated deception and political denial of the harm caused by nuclear and chemical contamination. We demand an end to corporate control of science and suppression of facts for political and financial gain. We are not assets on a balance sheet. We must honestly work together to remediate damage to benefit our planet and humanity. Remember, happiness is resistance, and love is greater than fear. Join the Age of Fission radio show on Spreaker.com. Search for Lonnie Clark for all our podcasted shows. Podcasts are also on YouTube at nutzfoart, nutzfoart. Thank you for being part of the solution. Good evening. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show, and I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us, and I want to thank KEPW 97.3 FM LP here in Eugene, Oregon for playing our podcasts. My podcasts are up on Spreaker.com, Spreaker.com, and you can look for the Age of Fission. And today I'm super excited. I have a guest on that I have not talked to in about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. She is just a mom, as she tells me that several times. Her name is Dawn Chapman, and she has really been a move maker, to be honest. She is co-founder of Just Moms STL, and they are advocating for the federal government to clean up their environment in the neighborhood where she lives. So welcome, Dawn. Thank you for joining our show.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Well, look, why don't you give our listeners a brief review of the situation in St. Louis, because most people outside of St. Louis barely know, if they know anything at all, what is the plight of the people in your neighborhoods.
So St. Louis actually was kind of the beginning or the dawn of the atomic age. We processed the first uranium here for the nuclear weapons program, for the Manhattan Project. And, you know, obviously you can look across the nation and you can find cities and communities just like ours that have been poisoned during the process of making these bombs through different various parts of the production. But in our city, it is really one of the best kept secrets. I mean, there are so many people that live here. My goodness, there are historians that have gone on to get their doctorate, like my brother, who had no clue that we played this role in the Manhattan Project. And so there are all sorts of sites scattered throughout St. Louis in St. Charles County where remnants of this radioactive waste was dumped, and has been allowed to pollute creeks and communities and groundwater. And in our community, there is a site where much of this waste was illegally dumped in 1973 in the floodplain of the Missouri River, literally smack dab in the middle of our community. And now, as of 2010, a fire started next to it, an underground fire. So it's an old, unregulated landfill. It's called the West Lake Landfill, and it has an underground fire about the size of 7 football fields. It's huge, and it's about 350 feet deep, this fire. It's massive, like a coal mine fire.
7 football fields? That is something I did not know. That's huge.
Yes, it is massive. This is a massive, massive fire. And you know, that's how wide it is. Like
what made it catch fire? Why is it on fire underground?
It's an old landfill, and it was it is a super fun site. There's a lot of hazardous waste. That's actually what's burning, and they were trying to pull the methane back on site. There were pockets of methane that were leaving the site, threatening homes and businesses, and so what the landfill owner did, they turned those wells up really high, and they sucked it back on. But when they pulled it back on, they actually pulled oxygen in, and it's unlined. And so the introduction of oxygen to waste that was already heated up and decomposing created a fire underground. And it's, again, I liken it to a coal mine fire in the sense that it cannot be put out.
Why is it that it can't be? Why can't they just shove water down there and put it out?
Because it's actually burning up in the water. I mean, it's a if you think of your barbecue pit, your charcoal, the smolder, that's what's happening underground. And if they dig into it and they introduce it to the air, it will come above ground. It's only about 600 to 700 feet away from areas of known radioactive waste on this site.
Well, I have a couple. Can I ask you a question about that? It's been going on a long time. I know you've been advocating. Has the federal government compensated your families, or did they give you guys free health care or anything like that?
Not at all. The federal government, other than the Environmental Protection Agency coming in and finally making a decision to remove as much of the radioactive waste as they can, there has been no compensation. There are multiple lawsuits filed now, rightfully so, because radioactive waste is being found in homes nearby. Because as you would expect, this waste has sat on the ground for over 40 some odd years, since 1973. And I mean, these are tiny, tiny particles. Every time it rains, the wind blows.
What about the flooding? You guys are in a flood zone.
We are. That is one of the biggest concerns. So far, the levee in this area is holding. But, I mean, should it break, or should it topple the levee, or should it back the creeks up? According to the FEMA maps, you don't have to even top the levee here. If the river goes high enough, the pressure could push back on the creeks that wind around the site and could actually cause flooding on the site. So,
what about historically? It's been there for a long time. Have you guys had floods in the past?
We have none that have ever topped the site. One came very, very close in 1993. But the levee did hold. The levee gave way further downstream, which took a lot of the pressure off of this levee here that's protecting the site. But again, it is literally threatened by every element on Earth. It's just the worst place you could think of to put this type of material. Not that there's a good place, but,
Are they spending any money in terms of trying to figure out how to not just remediate, but because their remediation is removal, but is there any money or science being put into how to reverse this chemical combination, how to separate? I mean, so that maybe they won't be so harmful, all these combined chemicals down there? Could they take that soup of whatever's down there and separate it out and make it less harmful?
So they are having to pump. It's the soup that you're talking about. They have a name for it. They call it leachate, and they are trying to pump it out and treat it on site. And then, unbeknownst to us, until it was too late to stop it, it goes through a 9-mile pipeline under multiple cities, and it goes to our main water treatment plant in St. Louis, where it's treated a third or fourth time, and then it's discharged into the river.
But they're contaminating the pipes of the main water pollution. I mean, the water processing plant in St. Louis? We don't
know. It is so hard to get information on this. As with anything radioactive, they get a little, twitchy and less responsive. They're trying to treat some of it on site, and then they treat it to a certain extent, and then it's shipped through the pipeline, and then it's treated a third, sometimes probably a fourth time at the main plant, and then, they dump it in the river. And at that point, we don't have any idea what happens because it's mixed in. once it gets to the main water treatment plant, it's not isolated. It goes into a main holding tank with a lot of other horrible industrial crap. And so there's no way once it gets there to, really tease it apart and say, oh, well, this little chemical here is from here, and this is, there's a lot of...
Wow.
There's got to be an adjective for it somewhere that I can't think of, but it's a hot mess, no pun intended. And it's a lot of moving pieces. There's what's going on with the site. There's the flooding. There's the radioactive waste.
I personally call it a crime against humanity. That is outrageous.
It is. And I think what bothers us is, when we hear it's going 9 miles through a pipeline, that's super fun material. And as horrible as what's happening to our community, it's like, God, we're going to ship it down this little pipeline here. We're not really watching it carefully. What if it breaks? What if this? And
well, are you aware of the Wigner effect? Have you heard of that? It's where it's a science. It's another part of the study of radioactive contamination. This guy Wigner, he's a German scientist, and he discovered that radioactivity basically breaks down the components that keeps metal together when it's continually exposed to radioactivity. The metal literally, glues fall apart, metals fall apart. That's why airplanes, the windshields are sort of falling off, and we're having these weird anomalies in airplanes. There's some scientists saying, we need to look at this because we have a lot of radioactive contamination in our atmosphere. And so, but I'm wondering, like with this pipeline, it makes me worry that, they've been doing this only like 3 or 4 or 5 years, right?
Right. It was laid before we even knew what was happening. A lot of us just thought it was road construction on the side of the roadway. And
so you watched them build it. I get it.
Yeah, and we thought, well, they're replacing pavement, or this is so... It's not funny, but that is, I think when the listeners are thinking, holy crud, how could this be happening and nobody know about it? This is so St. Louis, if that makes any sense. And it's probably other places as well when it comes to anything.
I think it's Americans. You know what it is? Americans fundamentally believe that people are going to do the right thing. I think that's really where we've gone wrong. Like, you guys looked at this construction for a while and thought, well, this is good due diligence. They're doing upkeep and building pipes and making sure things run over there.
That's exactly what I thought. And, I think your point is so valid, because I was thinking, it's going to be my 7-year anniversary in January. And I was thinking about just the changes that I've gone through. And I was one of those people. Like, when I heard that the EPA was over West Lake, and I'm like, well, I didn't even know what it stood for. And once I found out, Environmental Protection Agency, I thought, okay, we're in good hands here. We're going to be okay. And, it shocked me. I think after a few phone calls, I started to get the gist, and I thought, my little snow globe of a world was just kind of shattered. How I thought things worked, how I thought agencies worked, that we were the priority. And surely, if there were any risk, they would be knocking on doors and evacuating people. That just went all out the window. And I think some people say, well, that it taints the way you look, these fights taint the way you look at the world. And I'm like, no, I think that the glasses just came off.
Mm-hmm.
How
do you feel about your elected officials?
It's hard, because you would be surprised, even when we first started this, how few of them knew anything about it. In fact, my state representative, I literally chewed him pretty hard the first moment we're on the phone together.
What's his name? Congressman Lacey? Wasn't that Congressman Lacey?
No, this one was a state rep, but I've had similar conversations, and all of them, it's very interesting, because all of them, their response has been, okay, listen, I'm a state rep, or hey, I'm a member of Congress. if this was as bad as you were saying, I would already know about it. They would have to notify me.
Wow.
I mean, even the Republican senators, that was their response. And it was so, you know, we spent.
So they just acted like you were crazy, like you guys were just hysterical women being all freaked out over nothing.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's changed now. Now they know that we're right. Now they agree with us. Now they're asking the hard questions. But, you know, it's validation never feels, I think, the way that people think it's going to feel. I think it's just for people like us that have fought and given it all, I think it makes us more angry because it's like, well, dang it.
Yeah.
You know, I had to fight for years to get you to say that. And it's like, I'm glad you're saying it now, but all you can think about is what it cost to get them to say that.
Well,
how
this is what I mean, how many people had to get sick? How many more people are getting sick because they're refusing, even still to this day? The reality is, don't your children have issues, medical issues? Your family suffers?
They do. My husband, and you know what, Karen and I'm not going to mention their name,
right?
But we're going to a funeral tonight for a man who died from a brain tumor, and it just living. I mean, he lives in the subdivision on top of the site, and you know, we get this a lot. We're like, you know, can you tell for certain it was or wasn't the landfill? And it's like, listen, no, nobody can say that. I get it, but I'll tell you what, it didn't help, did it? And the
reality is, they could tell if they really wanted to. See, the science, they could test for heavy metals. The science is very firm. If they tested people's blood for heavy metals, it shows up what's in the blood, and you could compare studies of what causes it and what's the greater percentage of caused by the study. So you could, but this is the malicious evil of the nuclear industry. They refuse to look. They fired John Goffman for telling them this. John Goffman, this is why he wrote so many books. He wrote a book called Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution. Because I thought it was a joke, but it was real. He was trying to warn Congress because they were going full steam ahead and lying. I mean, he was deep. He discovered uranium-235. He was pro-nuclear. Let's be clear. But he was super against the lies and the secrecy.
See, and I think that the lies and the secrecy, it's interesting, and that's why I hope people really do listen to your show, because the people that live here in the community, I mean, even conservatives, they see the lies and the secrecy surrounding this issue on our site and the illnesses, and it's important that they understand that, while they're looking at what's happening in their backyard and we're all focused on this, that's great, that's important. But they also have to take a step back and understand that we are not the only community. This conversation is happening in so many different, it's happening globally. And,
it's true. What's worse is there's many communities that are contaminated where there's no conversation. That's what I think. This is the one thing. When I first met you several years ago, honestly, I was shocked, and I was shocked that people still live there. And I've even said that to you, like I'd move away. But now I'm here. I'm actually going on my 5-year anniversary in December of me being aware of what really went on. Like, I actually was like every American and thought the nuclear industry was perfectly safe. Even when Fukushima happened, I believed President Obama when he said, we're fine, things are great, we've handled it. And then a year and a half later, I had a nightmare about Hanford because my friend Louisa, who I just met, was trying to, Hanford's on nuclear and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, well, it's the government. They're handling it. I didn't even go see Dr. Caldecott. I'm like, yeah, I'm busy. Got to work. So,
and I think,
But I know in Oregon, what I have found in Oregon, we have some serious brownfield sites. We have one fuse wrap site in the city of Albany up there, and it is related to the nuclear industry because they process the chemicals and the nickel to make the nuclear products.
Yeah.
And it's like a little zone, a 5-mile zone. The EPA has like, higher levels kind of warnings, like they probably have in your neighborhood. Like now your neighborhood is kind of targeted on the EPA because they have to say where this stuff is. That's what, I mean, it's
that risk, the idea in this world, this is still my issue. If I had to pick one thing in this that still just makes me so angry, I could just run down the street screaming right now. The government plays this game with what it calls acceptable risk.
Right.
And
that's right.
They will look at any site, any situation, any type of pollution, whatever, not just radioactive, and they'll say, okay, so there is an acceptable risk, and once the risk is over that to the community, then we will,
be alarmed.
Then right, and then we'll start cleaning the site. But even then,
you guys are way below the acceptable risk, because you know what this is what they say. The NRC, their low threshold, zero tolerance. They're saying it's a low threshold, you can live in it. We have zero tolerance, but a low threshold, you can live in it. That's the acceptable thing. It is actually true on the NRC website. For every sievert, for every sievert in the air of radioactive contamination, they know they're going to get 32,000 cancers and leukemias a year, and over 225,000 birth defects a year. They know that. That's the acceptable risk. They're willing to harm our children, 220, and our elected officials have not stopped it because it's run.
Well, that's the upsetting thing, though, right?
This is what I talked about last night, though, Dawn, and I don't mean to overspeak you, but I'd love to get your take on it, because I know that you're in the belly of the monster. You've gone to Congress. You have been a fighter for this from the time you really found out, and you guys have done great work, which is why I'm honored to have you here. But I think we need to challenge the industrial military complex, because this is all about the war machine. Like, I feel very strongly like we need to have truth in science. We can't have secrecy in science. And we need them to be honest.
The first step, yes. The first step is to communicate with these communities and to get them to, I think the key is to burst the bubble on the risk assessments, because there is, yes, there is a certain amount of people who, if they get sick and die from this material, they feel, the government does feel like it's acceptable. It's written into their laws. It's written into the NRC. It's written into the EPA. West Lake actually does exceed the threshold for EPA, which is why they are going to clean it. But even exceeding that threshold is not enough to knock door to door in a community or send out postcards saying, hey, you live within half a mile, 1 mile, 2 miles, however many miles of the Superfund site that surpasses what we deem to be an acceptable risk. And I think, again, when people find this out, this is where,
I can't imagine.
The education comes in. It's like, I'll tell you, it's not acceptable if it's your kiddo, if it's your family member. And I think that the more conversations like this we can have on a national level with people, especially in our community too, the better we are, because that is how you get them to stand up and challenge these things.
It's true.
They simply do not, you said it in the beginning, and that was so true. They simply do not believe or can comprehend that part of this population is expendable to the government. They just don't. That's so un-American to them.
Yeah. Well, it is un-American let's be clear, it is un-American, and it's inhumane to run an industry and say, okay, because we want to have it and because it's good for outer space exploration and our military loves it, we're going to just accept this. I think that's a no answer. And I think I agree with you. We need people to speak out, because John Goffman was pro-nuclear, but what he said to the government, this is a great energy source, but we need to understand it. And what they did instead was fire him and went secret, and consider themselves the nuclear priesthood.
A little bit of Thomas Mancuso there, with the
how feasible
with the
is
low
it? Do
level
you
study.
think, Dawn? How feasible is it? Do you think if we could create a truth and reconciliation commission, sort of like what they had in, remember Rwanda, where all those horrible crimes happened,
Yeah.
where people got, well, this is very much the same thing. People are getting chopped up. People are dying. People are getting harmed because of this. And I think that there's so much anger. That's why they're keeping it secret. Because, like, the reality is, you probably went through it. The anger, like, how dare you? Like, this is such an assault on your very lives, but not really outright murdering you. It's so egregious. The silence, the complicity, the whole denial, all of it. I think we need to have a truth and reconciliation program and get every one of those owners of those nuclear facilities, all the scientists in the government, all the liars, all the perpetrators, and apologize and say, we're going to have free health care for anybody affecting that, which would probably put 90% of us on, government health care, because it's outrageous that people have to pay an insurance policy to protect themselves from cancer. When we were given
I think that's the issue, and I think that's the government. I think behind the scenes, the government is sitting there and they've got their little calculators out, and I think it's just going away. I think those numbers of you say 90%. I think the numbers just continue to go up on just who in this population would be would have to be covered, and I think. That's the one thing that scares them. And I think the other thing is that these communities have to be able, and I know it's hard. It is hard when you're going through a battle and you're fighting at your site to look at other sites. But there's sometimes there's a lack of teamwork. There's my site, my poison.
I get that. This is one of the reasons I want my show on the air, and I reach out to other advocates all around the country, because to be honest, that's exactly what I found when I first discovered this, when I got involved with the Post Ignorance Project in 2013. I really thought we could create a coalition of people, a nation of people. I didn't think anybody was that affected, but I thought it just made sense because of Fukushima. Like, I really had no idea. This has been like, the more you unpeel the onion, to be honest, it really, this is where you can put the tinfoil hat on my head. It feels like a really hardcore elitist propaganda conspiracy, to be honest, like of them really literally figuring out how to manipulate the public so they really never pay attention. So they're just suckers. Like, they're just like, what are you, like, St. Louis, what are you guys going to do about it now? You can't, like you said to me when I asked you a long time ago, and I apologize if I offended you for that, but you're like, well, what are we going to do? I mean, I was kind of nonplussed. I said to myself immediately, of course I'd leave, but after speaking with several people, and I think it was Wendy Lumetta who really put it in my head correctly, where are you going to go? Like, really? That's an impossibility. It's like victim blaming.
Well, it is, but you know what else it is too? And there's something to be said for this. If all of the people in all of the communities that were harmed by, let's not talk about other waste, let's just say this type of waste. All the people in every community that were harmed from this waste suddenly got up and moved away from the community.
Right.
I mean, first of all, where would we go? But second of all, who's left to fight the battle? Who's left? What do we do? Do we just say, okay, whoever moves in, let's.
Well,
let's
I mean, you could move away and fight the battle and move away, but that's the hard part.
But let me ask: is it as effective to fight a battle from a distance? Long distance versus if you're living here, you can see it, you can watch it. I can run to the site.
Wow.
I can run to the site if I have to. I've been to the site. We have people that run by all the time to check the levee, because nobody else is going to do that,
Well, this is what I think, Dawn. Do you mind if I just be honest? And, like, I can talk politically correct to not hurt your feelings, but your continued exposure to low-level radioactive contamination is causing severe harm to the genetics of your grandchildren. John Goffman said that it's the continued exposure. I mean, obviously we know the immediate exposure to high level is dangerous, right? So that's the risk. So what the government has done is say, well, and actually this is the thing. This is why I decided to just calm down, because you guys are in the belly of the monster. I very much respect the fact that you guys have dug in your heels and said, you know what, we're going to do it. Because this is what I've come to realize. Almost every single American has very high levels of radioactive contamination. This is why and especially Fukushima still has 3 nuclear meltdowns that are ongoing, that are in China syndrome. The reason they say it's going to take 40 years to decommission, that's an incorrect statement. They think it's going to take 40 years to invent the equipment that will allow them to touch this radioactive waste. It won't even be cooled down by then. If there's anything in there, it's in meltdown. So the reason the whales are dying is from Fukushima destroying the Pacific. It's literally the plutonium Pacific. We might as well rename it after Fukushima, because the plutonium ain't stopping. We are in China syndrome. It's in a hideous state. 3 of them. I mean, to be honest, I think my own granddaughter was affected by radioactive contamination from Fukushima. I live in Oregon. She has a very peculiar autoimmune disease. It doesn't harm her very much, but her eyelashes are really sensitive. She gets anything on her eyes or her eyelashes, she breaks out with a little... And I said, that's a weird thing. My daughter's like, yeah, the doctor said it's kind of a rare autoimmune disease. To be honest, did I tell my daughter that I thought my granddaughter might have been affected? No, I did not. No, I said nothing to her, because what does it matter? And
I think the matter of the whole thing, the whole matter for us is making sure that those that come after us don't suffer from this site. And in St. Louis, because of the proximity to all these sites, you would have to move. It wouldn't matter. You could move out to St. Charles, and then you've got Weldon Spring out there. Right. It's a tough area to live in.
There isn't any place in that area that really, when I first, it took me, actually, to be honest, it really took me until this year when I rewatched the first Secret City to truly comprehend. It's kind of like they built a box with dots. You know what I mean? There's 4 little sites, and it makes a little diamond. It's like the gold diamond of uranium right there.
Yep. And it does. And
well, let me ask you this then, because I really appreciate, you guys have made tremendous progress. Things are way, way, way million times better than they were when you first started.
They are, but it is tough. It is exhausting.
I bet it is. It is exhausting. How many people are in your group, the Just Moms STL?
So we don't have there's co-founders, Karen and I, but we don't have our group doesn't do a membership. Does that make sense? We have about, we're almost at 13,000 on Facebook with Just Moms, and then our West Lake page is close to 22,000.
Wow.
So, the
I'm on both of those. But when you guys go do your advocacy, how many people are with the Just Moms group? Just you and Karen?
Not just you. We usually try and take different citizens with us. Mm-hmm. Different people. I think because our faces are kind of known now, it's always good to bring someone else. Yeah, and to bring somebody who's, like you said, in the belly of the beast, and let them share their story of illnesses. Let them share what they're going through. Yeah. I think it works better than dots on a map, because I think the human component to all this is what really a lot of times gets to people, not the statistics. And it also empowers those people. The more you can pull these people in front of elected officials, all it takes is one time, and then usually, they're messaging us that night or the next day going, oh my gosh, I was like scared to death. And now it's like not a big deal. I'm ready to call all these people.
Awesome.
And I'm like, yeah.
Well, that is really good to know. That's good to know. I mean, I've become somewhat of an activist here in the Northwest because this was my next question, and I'll tell you about what I'm doing here. But it's good to hear that perspective because I do go into Ron Wyden's office on this issue, and I will start bringing people. But what do you think of the security risk of this site? Like somebody just has to throw, like something bad could seriously bad happen, and then if that thing were to really blow up and catch fire, like let's say some bomb, not that I'm projecting that, or an earthquake or something like super big
or
happen.
Or a plane crash to it.
Yeah, some weird thing, you know what I mean? Like, and it caught fire. Like if it breaks the ground, that fire is not going out, right?
No. There is no way to put it out even with the ground open. You'd have to fight it like a forest fire, and it would take months, half a year, to get it under control. And
the evacuation zone would be gigantic. The reason I say that is because of Columbia Generating Station is on the Hanford Reservation, 12 miles away from some of the most dangerous Hanford tanks that need to be maintained 24 hours a day. And if you ignore them, they have the potential of exploding after 72 hours. So if we had an earthquake that caused a small meltdown, which they could handle, close it up like they did at TMI and let everybody come back in 2 weeks, so say, the Hanford tanks would blow up in those 2 weeks. And we would have a very bad thing going on. And Tom Carpenter from Hanford Challenge said, that we could have a fire that would go on for 750,000 years.
Right. And that's perspective, right? Like, we don't think in those terms, but when you're dealing with things nuclear, when you talk about half-lives and how long this exists, how some of it becomes more radioactive through time, we really have something on our hands here that we don't fully understand and really know and have the capability to deal with. And I think that's hard at West Lake with this community because we get a lot of, why don't they just, and it's like, listen, because this stuff is so bad and we are so ill-equipped to deal with it that it's like Humpty Dumpty. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. It's like that. We do not, as humans, I don't know why, even Americans or whatever, there are problems that we can create that we don't have fixes for. And I think that is hard for a lot of people here to understand. They're like, well, just fix it.
You know why I think it's incomprehensible, Dawn? Because our country is wealthy. We have the strongest military. We have, great scientists.
Yeah.
What we don't have, though, is enough scientists. I really believe, this is what I think would help fix the nuclear, because I named my show The Age of Fission, because guess what? That's the age. We are in the age of fission, period. There's no going back from it. We are the first generation in the age of fission. I'm 64. I was the first generation of people that were bombed for practice. So we get it. And so I think we need a truth and reconciliation program where we have people just tell the truth and say what harm it's going to cause. And then we give kids free education and encourage them in science. We need lots of nuclear scientists, chemical scientists, biologists, health physicists.
Engineers,
we need people thinking out of the box so that we can go, hey, if we just did this, that would neutralize the radioactive contamination and stop the fission. That's what the answer we need. I'm not a science person, as anybody listening to this channel can tell. But I believe that if you can turn it on, there's a way to divert it to turn it off. I just believe in the yin and yang of life. I just think that's why God keeps protecting us, because he wants us to discover it, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a really good point that you make, though, the whole yin and the yang of it. I think that, we have to the community, and that's another thing, and all over. Well, what do you want to see happen at West Lake? What can happen? What's the best case scenario?
Right.
And, the truth is we don't have the scientists available or the technology to create a best case scenario. So what we have to do is we're talking in terms of risk to people, and we just keep knocking that risk down as far as we can get. Okay, let's knock down the risk of the fire hitting the waste. Let's knock down this. Let's knock down this. I mean, that number, the more that they do at the site, in terms of trying to stabilize the fire, they can't put it out, but they're trying to stabilize it and keep it from moving. That knocks down the risk. And
it's 7 footballs wide. Lives. Do you think they're stopping it from moving for real? At 7 football fields wide?
I think so far. The temperature probes and the gas probes show that it is holding steady. Now, if the ground begins to collapse more, because that's what's happening, because as it burns, it just like a building that burns collapses, the ground, will start pancaking and collapsing down. It already has. And it will eventually be not a mound, but it'll be concave. But, I mean, as we live it day to day, okay, so they're going to install these wells this week, and these wells are going to do this, and okay, so the risk goes down just a little bit.
I want to stop here because as you're talking, I'm realizing that our listeners have no idea what this facility looks like when you're saying that it's going to go down. Would you just sort of explain, how it looks and what they've done? Because haven't they covered it? Explain that a little bit.
So we call this site the Green Monster because where the fire is, again, 6 to 7 football fields wide, 350 feet deep, it's a big, giant hole blasted in a quarry in the floodplain of the Missouri River that then was filled with hazardous waste. And then it wasn't just filled to ground level. It was a giant mountain of hazardous waste at one point. And they declared it a Superfund site. And then at different other areas on site, nuclear waste from the Manhattan Project was dumped. But the site that's on fire is covered by this enormous plastic tarp. And since it's been burning since 2010, as the days and weeks progress and go, it's doing what a fire does. It's consuming what's under the ground, and so the ground is sinking. It is collapsing. And so where you had a 200-foot mountain that looks like it was 3-4 stories tall, now it's almost even with the ground. And soon it will be below the quarry wall. So it will actually be what they call concave.
It's even with the ground now. It went in the 5 years you've been doing this, it went from 400 to the ground.
It's pretty even with the ground. Wow. There may be a couple spots where it's 50 to 100 feet above the ground. They're trying to do what's called backfilling, which is where they try and pull dirt in and put it on top to keep it above ground. That's the goal, because when the site goes below ground, below the quarry wall, that fire could sneak up the side of the quarry wall. There could be a crack in the ground. There's lots of fissures and cracks, but they're covered with that tarp. There's a lot of, the fire at this site is what makes it so unique, but so friggin', just a monster, because it's unpredictable. It changes day to day, and it's really, we've had the fire creep up wells. We've had gas fires. I mean, that tarp alone, that plastic tarp alone is flammable and will burn. So, now it has its own chemicals and whatnot in it. So it's a very, it is tedious. I'm telling you, they come out with data. There are little temperature probes in the ground all over this site to watch areas that are not on fire to make sure another one doesn't start in those areas, but to also watch the one that's going now to be able to see where it's heading and what it's doing. We get that data, and we spend hours going over it and saying, okay, where was it last week? Where is it this week?
Wow.
And you can tell when you look at this data you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier that, this really has an effect on metal and whatnot. You can see that some of the equipment gets too hot and it burns out.
Right.
Or it stops working, and then we're like, well, crap. Now we got to go replace it, and it takes a while to replace it, and then we got to get the new readings in and see, well, what's happened while it was down.
What's the average readings there? What are the readings? Like, what are they? What's the readings around your house? I mean, what's the levels? I mean, what are we talking about?
Well, we don't get those levels. We have no air monitors around my house, but the readings on site are what we have, and those are showing, for the temperature alone, those are in the high 200s, 300s. I mean, this fire is still going. And it's
how much radioactive contamination? Do they show that?
They do not.
They don't show you?
They do not. There are not. No.
They're not telling you the radioactive contamination?
No, we see what's on the ground. We can see counts per minute and borehole readings that they have done when they've done soil samples in West Lake. Mm-hmm. But we don't see
what are
any
those like when
they
what's that like underground? Off the charts, gazillions.
It is. Yeah. And the interesting thing...
What are your neighbors? I'm sure somebody in your neighborhood's got a Geiger counter. What shows up? Like,
So not a lot shows up because there's not a lot of gamma. Our site is really heavy with thorium-230, which is an alpha emitter.
Yeah.
So, that's the problem. But there are areas on site that if you walk over them with a Geiger counter, and we can't because obviously the area is fenced off, but if you were to walk over them, I mean, they would bury the needle.
Wow.
I mean, it's
so that's an interesting thing to point out that you talk about is you can't really test for thorium with a Geiger counter, or you can with a super expensive one, I guess.
You would have to, you would have to get one, and you'd have to really
know how to use it.
You'd have to look. You would. You'd have to look at the daughter products. Some of those give off a low energy reading, which is really hard. So you'd have to be. It'd have to be calibrated the right way.
You'd have to really know what you're doing.
Yeah, and it would be hard. One thing that we do see, and there's actually a study out there by Marco Kaltofen from Worcester Polytechnical Institute and Lucas Hickson and at Bob Alvarez. This site puts off an incredible amount of radon. And the lie or the story that the government and everybody in the agencies want to tell you is that radon disperses. No, it does not. It is a radioactive gas that changes form. It changes into another radioactive isotope and then falls down and accumulates on homes and ditches and whatnot as lead-210. And so one of the things that they did is they walked the site, and they've done this at other sites, to be able to track off-site migration, looking for what they call unstable lead-210, unsupported. And that is, again, everybody, they say, oh, yeah, the radon on the site is bad, but it disperses. It disperses. And lead does not just disappear. That isn't what happens. It goes up as it goes, and then a lot of times the rain and the wind below it, and then it ends up radioactive lead.
Wow.
Which is found at uranium mill tail sites. If you look over documents where people mine this uranium, they're very, very worried about lead-210, the agencies. They find it in fields and whatnot, but they don't want to track it from this site. And so there is hope out there, I guess is what I'm saying. You do have some great scientists that are using their noodles and coming up with some very, very prominent ways to track this.
That's awesome. I mean, this is the good thing is that there are people who are actually really attempting to make a good effort at protecting your community. I mean, how far, I have two things to say here. First, for the listeners that were listening to what you were saying, daughters are what they call, when radioactive elements decay, they become other radioactive elements, and those are called daughters. Is that correct?
Yeah, we joke it's like the movie Gremlins. The daughters are sometimes worse than the parents.
Well, that is with the
And
intentional, I'm sure when the scientist created those names, he must have had nothing but daughters in his house.
I know, I laugh, the hurricane, the daughter product,
So
that
then I
sort
have
of
my
thing.
second
But
question to ask you. How far away are you guys from St. Louis Airport?
so West Lake Landfill, part of it, the tip-top portion where the radioactive waste is actually, part of it is like easement of the airport. So we are very, very close. So close that the area that the landfill is in has to be careful. The entire area down there, they can't build buildings that are over a certain height.
Wow.
And and we actually, you can look up news articles of planes that have crashed over here on the side of the highway right by the site. So that is an absolute real risk.
So
And
that is really
I
part
think,
of the Wigner effect, Like that would probably, I wonder what the percentage of plane crashes at the St. Louis site are compared to other sites. That'd be an interesting little rabbit hole to follow down.
I don't know, but I'll tell you, I mean, I know because I've got the borehole, and I can send you some of the stuff, some of that. I could send you the article with the unsupported lead, and I can send you some documents that show surface readings. When you look at these, and these are 2 million counts per minute, on the Geiger counter, the needles buried. They're not, the thought of flying over that, well, that's gamma. That goes up. I mean, so it's, it's
This
kind
is
of
why I
an
think
issue,
we need a truth and reconciliation program, to be honest, because it's it's outrageous. I mean, it makes people, this is why they're keeping it secret, because they know if people knew, there would not be rational, people would become irrational. It's an assault. It's an assault on the American public by the nuclear industry. Actually, by any public. The nuclear industry needs to cease. They need to do what John Goffman said, figure out how to manage the byproduct, which they now call waste, but figure out how to deal with it and keep it out of the environment. It is too catastrophic to ignore this. Look, Dawn, we have 4 minutes. We have 4.5 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you if there's anything that's on your mind that you'd like to talk about and let people know, or how they could help you guys, or anything that our listeners can do, and what like if you would like to have them take anything, because you as my interviewee can, this airs on a nonprofit, so I can't advocate, but you can advocate. So is there anything you want our listeners to know or do?
The first thing is, wherever you're looking at and listening from across the country, take a really good look around you. Look up, see if you've got a super fun site in your neighborhood. You probably do. You probably have a few, actually, at a brownfield. Just first thing is become aware of your area, and the other thing is become aware of other areas that actually impact yours. If you step back and you view a map of the United States of America, you're going to see rivers, Missouri River. This entire nation is connected. You've got aquifers. What happens across the nation affects you, I guarantee you, one way or the other. And, find a community. Maybe it's ours, maybe it's another. You've got Rocky Flats.
They've got the Columbia Generating Station here in the Northwest.
Yeah.
I would really encourage people. I have started a new podcast called The Last Nuke. And because that Columbia Generating Station on Hanford is the last nuclear power plant in the Northwest, and it is losing $500 million a year on top of being a danger. So, but anybody in the middle of the country, there is Rocky Flats. Illinois has the Zion nuclear power plant that is a mess. Indian Point is leaking. There's no emergency plan. Oyster Creek down in Florida, you have Turkey Point, Savannah site in South Carolina. It's all over the place.
It is, and you don't have to look far to find a community affected. And so do that. Go out and just do some very, very basic Google searches. Find a community that needs help and get on board. I mean, we could use your help here, but I'll tell you what, there are so many others that can. You've got the gaseous diffusion plant in Ohio with the radioactive waste in a middle school.
Exactly.
I mean, those parents, those kids, They are going to need some medical monitoring. They're going to need some help. Reach out. There's always something you can do, from tweeting to writing to calling to just messaging. And support podcasts like the one you're listening to now. Support them. Support people that support small communities that are dealing with this.
Thank you, Dawn. That was perfect timing. We have about a minute and a half left. And I want to thank everybody for listening. You've been listening to Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. My guest has been Dawn Chapman. She is one of the co-founders of Just Moms STL. And we've been talking about the catastrophic event of the first secret city, which is St. Louis and a small portion of Illinois. And we really appreciate you getting engaged, and actually whatever action you want to take, I am super appreciative of it. And thank you, KEPW 97.3 FM LP here in Eugene, Oregon, for carrying my show. You can catch my podcasts on Spreaker.com, look for The Age of Fission, or go to my YouTube channel where they all post at Nutzforart, which is NUTZFORART, because before Fukushima, that was my main focus. And here we are. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Dawn, for joining us. It's been really delightful. I hope you will come back.
I absolutely will.
That is perfect. Thank you so much. And you guys, as I say, put your courage feet on and know that happiness is resistance and love is greater than fear. Talk to you guys next week.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining the Age of Fission radio show. Please like, subscribe, and share on Spreaker.com or on the YouTube channel Nutzforart, NUTZFORART. Send all comments and ideas to Lonnie Clark at ageofvision@gmail.com. We urge all, especially scientists and politicians, to follow the words of our beloved American icon, Mark Twain. Always do right. This will gratify some and astonish the rest.